Have you ever done a drawing and it just feels really flat and boring? Chances are it's because your lines are too similar. The line weight might be a term that you've not heard of before, which I guess is why you're here, and it refers to how thin, thick, light or dark your lines are. So why does line weight matter, and more importantly, how do you apply it to your artwork? Before I begin, please consider subscribing. Apparently it helps, and I'm still new to this YouTube thing. Thanks. So line weight has a lot of uses in a drawing. It can help show perspective by showing one thing is overlapping another thing, and it can also be used to help your drawing read better from a distance as well. You can also lead the viewer's eye in what you want them to pay most attention to by adopting this hierarchy. And what that basically means is there are 3 different types of line that you can use, which is thick, medium and thin. Now there are infinite variations on line that you can use, so don't take this too literally, but just for simplicity's sake, there's 3 different types of line. So how many of these types of line do you need? The short answer is it's up to you, it's your work. But if you're struggling, then hopefully this will help. I'm going to start with the thick lines first. Now Marco Bucci talks about color harmonies, and he says that colors talk to each other. He says that the more saturated colors are the loudest and the more muted colors are the quietest. At least that's what I interpreted from his videos. But I love this. I thought it would really help me, and I think that the same applies to lines as well. The thickest lines are the loudest talkers and the thinnest lines are the quietest talkers, and you need a combination of the two. So one of the most common uses for the thick lines are things like the silhouette of your drawing. If the drawings on the outside, the outline of your drawing are the thickest, then it will usually help read it from a distance, like this. So this is the same picture of this torso, and if I zoom out, you should be able to hopefully see that the drawings in the middle and on the right are easier to read than the one on the left, and that's because I've got these thick lines around the outside, so you can read it from a distance a bit easier. So it's not just a silhouette, it's also stuff within drawing as well. So for example, if you look at these lovely pecs and this arm, there's a thick line applied to here, which shows that the arm and the pec is on top of the ribs and the general torso. Likewise, the chin is in front of the neck. And this principle basically applies to anything that is in front of something else usually will have a thicker line. It could be subtle, but it's almost always the case. So I'm going to skip the medium lines for now and go straight to the thin ones. Now going back to the torso, you can see here on this image to the right that these little lines here are more for the details. Like these are the quiet guys who are just subtly there working in the background. And usually what I would use these lines for are for things like texture, so hair strands, subtle changes in planes like this, or to show maybe that there's a small fold, in this case a muscle or maybe a shirt. Another example of the little lines doing a lot of the work is this tiger drawing. The little lines are there for the fur and all these little details for the texture and all that sort of good stuff, and the medium lines are for the larger elements like the eye socket and the frown lines, and then you've got big black lines for the outside and for the shadows and for the stripes. And all these 3 lines work together to tell you what's going on with this tiger. So yeah, so the thin lines are for the details, the thick lines are for the big shapes and for overlaps, and the medium lines basically are everything in between those 2 extremes. And if you use all 3 of those types of line, then it brings the whole drawing together and you can really get a sense of 3-dimensionality and depth, which is what you're looking for. So an example of that is this bad boy. Now this is a hunter from Halo that I did on stream, and you can see if I zoom in on his face here, you've got these thin little lines for the texture of his skin, medium lines for the eyes and underneath the helmet thing and this mandible, and the thick line for the outside of the helmet to show that this is closer to us than this. Likewise with the shield, you've got the thick line here to show that the shield is in front of the body. So you've got these 3 lines that you're applying to your drawing, but they don't have to be quite so rigid. The thick line doesn't have to be 100% thick, and the thin line doesn't have to be 100% thin. You can have varied lines, and you should have varied lines. Now these are usually referred to as tapered lines because they go from one to another, so they will go from thick to thin or thin to thick. And if I go back to this torso, you can see example here on this arm. So this arm starts thick and it goes thin, thick into thin, and this tapers off into thin as well. And the more you do this, the more natural it will feel, and you'll just start to do your lines like this. Because if all the lines have the same thickness, then the drawings can look a bit flat as well. Whereas having that variation just brings out a bit more dynamism and three-dimensionality. But with all of this being said, a lot of the time this is down to your personal preference. Like, some people like more exaggerated lines, some people like more subtle lines. You just got to find what works for you. But I said earlier that I'd have a simplified guide, and this is it. So 3 lines: thick lines for the outline and for overlaps, thin lines for small details like texture and little plane changes, and medium lines, everything in between. Another thing to consider is that when you're doing your drawing, you don't have to think about these lines first. That can come later. Draw your thing first. Like, get the drawing done, and then you can make decisions on top of that. So for lines that you want to thicken up, just go over those lines again and the line will thicken up. Then you can decide how much you want to be thick, thin, medium, whatever. Again, it's pretty much up to you. So the more you do this, the better you'll get. And if you didn't really apply this before, apply it to your next drawing and then compare it to a drawing that you felt was quite flat. You should be able to see a difference. Anyway, I hope this helped clear up that concept a bit. If you've got any other questions, leave it down in the comments or message me on Twitter. And if you want another video to do with line weight, then check out Scott Robertson on YouTube because he's very good. Anyway, I've been Brinkley, have fun drawing, and I'll see you in the next video.